So hello, Mark. Nice to see you again.
Nice to see you too, Howard.
Uh, I,
Actually, that's the first time I've seen you,
yeah, I know. I was going to
at
say,
least face
yeah,
to face, so to
yeah,
speak.
yes, yeah, absolutely. And thanks for your suggestion as regards Metallica, because
Oh,
obviously,
thanks.
it's perfectly timed with the Black Album and everything. Um, and this almost feels like the start of a Motorcast interview. But how did you begin? How did you end up working with Metallica? Because obviously you were, you were in the biz at that point.
Yeah, I mean, and I'll make this swift as far as the understanding is. I mean, the beginning of growing up in the Bay Area was kind of like, I mean, I've had plenty of time to kind of contemplate this whole thing. I mean, there's this certain history and this mystique that kind of surrounds the Bay Area as this epicenter
Yeah,
of thrash music. And so many great bands have come out of the Bay Area over the years. I mean, back in the 60s, you had Grateful Dead, Jefferson Airplane, a lot of the hippie rock and roll bands. But
yeah,
a huge explosion, kind of an epicenter of musical creativity. And just as every generation kind of feels like when you're coming up and you're beginning of your teens, oh, I've missed the great eras of music. You
yeah,
just, because you can't
yeah.
forecast, you just see the tail end of things. So our generation was like, there's a lot of crime in the Bay Area. There's, the economy was in kind of a wreck pretty much all over. But and we're just growing up kids, kind of like, okay, well, what about us? Where's our music scene? And we were on the tail end of the 70s, kind of these dinosaur stadium rock bands of Aerosmith. And we had these things called Day on the Greens that Bill Graham used to do,
Yes,
which
well,
were,
yeah, because of
yeah.
course Metallica ended up playing one famously.
Exactly. So, when I was in my teens, there was really no local scene per se. There was bubblings of, like, people that used to play in Quicksilver Messenger Service or Jefferson Airplane, and you had like Ronnie Montrose lived in the Bay Area as well as Sammy Hagar. So there was these seeds of 70s rock super bands. And
Yeah,
anyway, so, but as a kid, you're growing up, I don't want to listen to that. I want to hear some. So punk came along,
yeah, of
and that
course.
caught everyone's ears,
Yeah,
especially the younger crowd. And we started, there were kids that were forming their bands and such like that. But then there were kids that were like the rock scene, and they wanted something a little heavier. And then that was the evolution, essentially, of like the burgeoning of a scene, just the very small seeds. So you had bands like, and these are all kids that I went to high school with or junior high with, like Alex Skolnick from Testament, which
yeah,
they used to be called Legacy.
yeah.
And there was half the kids were taking lessons from Joe Satriani, who used to teach lessons out of the back of a used instrument store right around the corner from my junior high. And Alex Skolnick, who was a classmate of mine, he was taking, and I wanted to play guitar, so he's like, "Oh, you should go." You had to audition to be a student.
Yeah.
And at the time, I drew a lot, but it was mostly on the backs of jackets or, on the back of my school folder. Um, but so I went to audition for him, and I was like, oh, I want to take lessons. So I noodled about and played, like, I don't know, Stairway to Heaven and some other, thing I trotted through. And after about 10 minutes, he just kind of looked at me and said, do you have other hobbies? And I said, well, yeah, I like to draw. And he goes, yeah, I'd stick with that. And that was the end. I mean,
Wow.
I was like, okay, I'm not going to be in that, Parthenon of great rock guitarists coming out of the Bay Area. So I just kind of gave up on that. But I started drawing. I took it seriously, and almost like a grudge drawing. So, and that was my introduction into, essentially, as my friends were playing in bands, I was coming up and kind of got told, well, you're not going to be playing in our bands, but we do need a flyer.
Yeah.
hey, we
Yeah,
do need a
yeah.
logo.
Yeah,
And I was like, yeah,
guys like you were. I'm because as you're saying this, I'm recognizing this. Um, you know, with my experience, all those, you know, a few years behind you guys,
yeah,
a few years later, and like my best friend at school who drew the cover of Moshkinstein and drew the cover of The
yeah.
Fear, and our guitarist's brother who was also a roadie
Oh,
who did other drawings for us and stuff and leaflet design, but
brilliant.
we weren't really in a scene, so we
Yeah,
didn't need the poster and the leaflet design, but we still had those like demos that needed, you know, covers doing.
yeah.
And so people, but
Some sort of
also,
graphics.
yeah, but also I remember I had our guitarist brother Stilly. He was a jacket painter. And,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
and like, I mean, you guys were in steep demand, you know. It's like if I can get some of these like breakthrough bands logos, you know,
Yeah.
on my jacket. I remember like Voivod, Descendants,
Oh,
Trouble,
yeah.
you know, and it's like it was like these are badges of honor, and if these can get painted on, I am like, you know, I'm good. So
Yeah.
you must have been in big demand.
Well, at first, I mean, I'll take one step back. Is that, you know, as a teenager growing up, and you're coming into a large, you know, a large high school, there was maybe a handful of us who liked that kind of harder edge music. So my pool of like trying to get the attention of other people was fairly small. And I get at this time, this is like 1982. So the scene was just starting, but essentially I found like a calling card, like you're saying, a badge of honor. I would walk into school and I had spent like the weekend drawing like an elaborate, you know, Motorhead skull or a Swan song, Led Zeppelin, whatever it was. And, you know, I'd go down to there was an army surplus, a military surplus clothing store. So you
Yeah,
could get an army shirt, which was just a perfect canvas, uh,
yeah,
similar to the idea of the Venice Beach crew who would draw these elaborate skulls with the flipped up ball caps and all that on the back of that. This was our version. And I would show up at school and you get like, oh, where'd you get that? Oh, did you do one for me? And it turned it into a small business where I
yeah,
felt, you know, not like a bootlegger per se, but I was like, what's your favorite band? Oh, I'll draw that. And then it became painting,
yeah,
and I painted on the back of jackets. So
yeah. That's it.
exactly like you were saying, you do get a little bit of credibility. You get a little bit of like, oh wow, this guy can draw. Can you draw this? Can you draw this? Can you do this for us? We need a backdrop.
Yeah,
And that was essentially the start. Was this band Legacy, when my friend Alex Skolnick was in, and another friend of mine who was his manager said, oh, Mark can do flyers for you. And then, you know, from there it just kind of, we could do a backdrop. And I said, yeah, I guess I can. If I can paint this small, I can paint that big. At least I thought at the time. So, I mean, and I think we talked about this in the Motorcast, where it's
yeah,
just like,
that's right.
to say no is just like too frightening. So you
Yeah,
accepted
yeah.
everything and learned on the way. Fake it till you make it.
Well, I was laughing there because what you were saying about, like, you know, being asked all those years ago if you could draw a backdrop, and straight away it reminded me of you saying, of you being asked to draw a design for Mickey D's drum kit.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and just saying, yeah, no problem, you know, and
Yeah,
then and then actually having to do it.
exactly. Yeah. I mean, and that's what this was. I mean, essentially it was like, well, I've seen, you know, I've gone to a couple of Day on the Greens and I've seen those large stage scrims that they've done. So my head is like, I think I could do that. It's just, how do you figure it out? I wound up getting a black bed sheet, throw it down on my mom's living room floor, pulling all the furniture to the side, and I start painting. They wanted this huge silver pentagram, you know, silver sparkly paint, so
Yeah,
that when the light hits it, it would illuminate. And then the rest was just acrylic paint. So I did this very elaborate logo with a big goat skull and this 8-foot pentagram on, and and unfortunately the silver paint soaked right through the fabric into my mom's hardwood living room floor.
Oh
So
man.
the band comes, Alex is like, we pull up we didn't know this at the time, but it had dried. We left it on the floor, dried it, and as we pulled it up, both Alex and I are picking it up, and it's like, I think it's stuck, and we're pulling this up.
Shit.
And the banner's fine, but now I'm stuck with this 8-foot tall, pentagram on my mom's living room floor. And I'm,
but that's exactly where a pentagram's supposed to be, though, isn't it?
Exactly.
And so you get to summon the devil.
Yeah, and that's like, my mom was out shopping, comes home, sees me on all fours scrubbing an 8-foot pentagram out of her living room floor. The groceries plop on drop right to the floor, and a scream like, "What are you doing when I'm not in the house?" Mom, no, though, there's a backdrop. I don't see a backdrop. Anyway, it was so, and that moment kind of defines my whole career as far as working for bands. It's like I've fallen ass over tea kettle into these situations that I've got myself, into. I've accepted the job. I'll figure a way around it. I may break a few eggs by baking this cake. And, I finally got all the stuff out of my mom's floor. But anyway, so those kind of things happen. Like I worked for Law's Rocket. They wanted a banner. But the big thing that day was that people liked airbrush artists. Well, I've never picked up an airbrush in my life. And just like I've done tattooing before as well. So I've learned these different mediums, but you can't just fake your way into that, especially with a tattoo. It's like, I want a portrait of my mother. And then at the end of it, it's like, well, how fond are you of your family pet? Because that might translate closer to that. And we'll work on your mom on the other arm. So I paint these backdrops, and like I'm using red for flames, and the red turns to pink when it dries. And so I mean, it's like this heavy metal band's going over to Europe for the first time with the pink flame backdrop, and they're like, nah, this ain't working. Sorry, Mark. And I was like, I'll get it right the next time. So anyway, you suffer through these things. So long story short, as I'm coming up working with these bands who are suffering through my trials and tribulations to get them graphics, I find a couple bands, I start doing logos for t-shirts, and the name starts getting around, and then Metallica come up from LA, and they're playing in the club scenes, and they're here and there, but they're very accessible. And just like all the other bands that are opening for them at this time, some of them are headlining over them, and then that quickly flips as Metallica starts their trajectory. I'm at parties with my friends, and they are in bands, and they introduce me to Metallica. These guys are just up from LA, and so I go and see them, and and my top of my head goes way off. You could just tell when you're sitting there growing up, watching all your friends in these bands and other bands that are touring. They're coming up and they're trying to get this sound. They're trying to get the crowd appeal. They're working on a shtick. They've got song structures and all this.
Yeah, they're in development. And my guess is Metallica arrive fully formed.
They are at the top of their game, and it is so palpable. You walk in, I mean, I mean, the only thing I can attribute it to, because I've never experienced anything like that before, but it must have been what, like, some fan that walked into the Cavern Club in the 60s and stumbled upon this band, the Beatles, who happened to be playing at a lunchtime gig, or the first time Hendrix got up on a stage. I mean, it and not to sound corny, it sounded like you were watching perfection. It just, I mean, they had it nailed. So
I know what you mean, though, because when you even now, when you hear a band, or when you see a band and everything works, all of the pieces fit and it seems natural, nothing's forced, sounds great. Still to this day, that's the thing that still makes me take a step back because you go, yeah, well,
Yeah.
like these guys. I mean, I am not a fan of Amon Amarth by any stretch of the imagination. In fact,
Right.
I was only there to see Testament, who was supporting because I know Gene,
Oh,
and
cool.
and I watched Amon Amarth for a little bit before Gene grabbed me,
Yeah.
but and I was just like, yeah, absolutely. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't even like you
Yeah.
like it,
But you can appreciate it.
but it's unfuckable with. You
Yes.
know, it's like you know, I could
Yeah.
be stood in that crowd and turn to somebody and go, yeah, it's not all that, is it? And they go, shut the fuck up, and you'd be like, yeah, sorry,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, no, I've been in that situation as well. Yeah, you go, it's like I'm going to suffer through this to see this, and then you're like, holy cow, I have a whole new appreciation. I may not go out and buy the record, but I can certainly say, yeah, I'm not going to shit talk about this band anymore because, god damn it, they're really good. I mean, they've got something good. So
yeah,
Metallica are like that, and you're just anyway. And I said, you know, at a time when all these bands are not necessarily pulling for worldwide pole position, but they're really vying for the attention of the Bay Area thrash scene. And there was this very overlying, like a Dogtown and Z Boys kind of feel, like locals only, but you know, not well, very welcoming to anybody else that wanted to come in and join and be part of that scene, or were
yeah.
playing that type of music. There was a welcoming, but it was also very protective, and there were like stalwarts of that kind of culture, like Paul Bailoff. I'm sure you've heard stories.
Can I intrude here then?
Yeah, yeah,
Because the question I have, because it's only just occurred to me, because you're you know you know you're absolutely right, and because you were there at the time, you started me thinking they were coming from LA. Well, we all know why they came from LA.
right.
And that was Cliff. So was Cliff their kind of Cliff was their pass, as in, like, right, if this isn't an LA band who are turning up on our doorstep, if it was four guys from LA rocking up, it would be like,
Yeah.
well, you're just gonna have to fucking earn some stripes for a minute, no matter how good you may be. But given they had Cliff in the band, that was like, okay, that's ballsy.
Yes. And at the time, and you're very right, there was a strange balance. And again, this is only my perspective. I was growing up in the area, and friends that I have known my whole life growing up, you know, they have their perspectives as well, and we all talk about it from time to time, and some of us talk about it from time to time.
Yes.
But at the very beginning of it, it was an LA band. And this is when it was Dave Mustaine and Ron McGovney, Larson,
Right,
and
of course.
James.
Yeah, okay.
So at the time, and they had started coming up, and they had played the old Waldorf. And this is at a time too where our local, you know, torch bearers or whatever of the scene were Laws Rocket and Exodus. These guys were, Laws Rocket just had their in with all the clubs. So they were the local guys that were headlining, and we'll have other people. So anyway, Metallica would come up at this small, you know, the original lineups would come up from LA, and they would be introduced underneath somebody else that everybody was coming to see. So there was this soft sell. It was like, yeah, they're an LA band, but the music was talking to people like,
Yeah,
there's an LA band. So sure, we had our hackles up for a little bit. And it's interesting that you say about that, about getting that kind of almost that street cred by getting Cliff. At the time, the music did the talking. And it was like, these guys are coming up, they're an LA band, but they get it.
Yeah.
Similar to Slayer. Slayer came up, they were Orange County, Southern California, and they showed up with eye makeup. And as heavy as they were, Paul Bailoff, you know, they did a show with them. Paul told them, if you don't take off that makeup, there will be blood in the pit. I mean, the Bay Area fans don't take kindly. You don't need it, trust me. And that very night, that very next night that they played, there was no eye makeup, and they were instantly like embraced. So Metallica, the music did the talking, no makeup or anything like that. But they came up, and people recognized it. And then there was they saw Cliff, and they knew that they had to up their game, and this guy was phenomenal. Cliff was in Trauma, this local band Trauma. So there was, and there were these small pockets of people that recognized that Cliff was this one guy. And also on the same spectrum, you had Kirk Hammett, who had started Exodus with Tom Hunting. He's a local guy. So they got Cliff, and Cliff's demand was, I'm not in LA. I don't want to have anything to do with LA. You want to be with us? You come up here if you want me in your band. So they had done that. And on, not on a musical level, but on a local level, this band had moved up from LA. They took a house in El Cerrito, which is just up the street from my old house. So they got introduced socially. So in that Bay Area scene, there was, obviously the musical prowess, but also there was this party prowess that these guys had. And everybody, they became really tight friends with this small group of people. So that credibility was just like, not like anybody said, you're no longer can call yourself an LA band. And they did, they kind of shed that. They came in. And then when they got Kirk, because Dave Mustaine became untenable and they were on their way to record Kill 'Em All and all this, there was a small bit of time that very few people talk about, but there was this, you've poached one of Exodus, if you ask anybody that growing up in the Bay Area, Exodus were the kings. Yeah. Exodus were our flagship band, bar none. Metallica was great on all levels. Everybody recognized that fact, but there became this almost this local, who's going to headline, who's going to, and it was quite obvious that Metallica were getting on this trajectory, but Exodus as well. For locals, us, we were almost rooting for Exodus, and then when, and when I say rooting, I know take that very tongue in cheek. Yeah. Because there was this little bit of this, this kind of one-upmanship going on at the time. I mean, people were really vying for that crown. And Exodus, every Exodus show was just hands down, just solid, great. And people were just like, oh, they're going to make it. They're going to make it. Right on that trajectory, they get Kirk. So there's this pull out, and there's a little bit of instability in the local scene. And a little bit of concern, are they going to stay a local band? I mean, these guys were on this trajectory, but now they've hobbled, so to speak, our local favorites. And then Gary Holt and all the the band starts, the Exodus starts kind of securing their foundations, but it was perceived as a wobble. They really hobbled them for a short period of time, but then everybody got on board with everybody, kind of like, let's get these guys together. But anyway, so long way around. I had been introduced to the band at parties, Metallica at parties, and slowly but surely, hey, I've painted a backdrop for Legacy or Las Rocket. You start building this tiny little crayon drawn resume of hey, I've done this for these guys. Oh, I heard about that. How's your mom's floor? And you're like, oh, and I became it was kind of like I was a butt of jokes, and I was okay with that because it was funny, but it was like, well, I'm trying to do better. I learned the second, so I would constantly approach them with like, hey, I drew this. Hey, I want to do this. Oh, we've got a guy that does backdrops, in silver, but it doesn't stick to the floor, and it came out really nice. So I would pursue them. And then they took off, and they were just, seemingly out of reach. Still very in touch with a lot of the locals, but I was a friend of the band, but not necessarily a close associate. So when they would come and play the local shows, and this is after Master of Puppets, and then they got into the And Justice for All and things like that, that I would go to the shows, and I would see friends that were going backstage. So I would like, oh, could you bring this back? I became quite a pain in everybody's ass, I'm sure. And some people were like, yeah, Mark, okay, we'll bring it back. And, a drawing. And I had done this contest I was working at a local Tower Records, and I was making these foam core displays. And I did this advertisement. It was a contest to advertise for the And Justice for All shows, first ones, to advertise the show. So I made a cereal box. They were called, they were titled like, the Crunch Metal. So I said, everything with me at that point, I very tongue in cheek. So I made a joke about it. I was like, oh, they're like the Captains of Crunch. So I made a Captain Crunch cereal box, which was an American cereal brand. Anyway, so I put their faces on that. I redrew what Pushead had done, caricatures of them, but I drew them with these big cartoon pirate hats on, and I made this design. Took a photo of it, brought it to the show, and a friend of mine, Fred Cotton, who was the singer for Spastic Children, and he's good friends with the guys, and I see him from time to time. So I did my regular routine. I brought the little photo to the show, and I saw him, as he was going backstage, handed to him, and I said, hey, could you just show it to him and see if they think it's funny? Halfway expecting them to, tell him to piss off. And it's like, okay, whatever. Yet again, somebody else has done something better than that. He comes back and he's like, grabs me by the collar and yanks me inside. He goes, they want to meet you. And I'm like, you're kidding me. And he's like, no, they love it. And I go, at first I thought they wanted to pummel me for it because I did, it's a seeming very serious band. And here is this silly thing. They loved it, and like they all signed the photo and whatever. And Lars particularly is like, where is this? I want this. And I said, it's at the record store I work at. He goes, I'll be there next week because we're off the tour. This is the end for a little bit. We're taking a wee bit of a break before we go to Europe, I think it was. And he lives in the Bay Area. And he goes, I just bought a house and I'd like to put it in there. And I said, oh, that's great. So he shows up about a week later at my work. Here comes Lars Ulrich walking down the center aisle, and all these people are like, oh my God. And he goes up to the office and he goes, where is it? And I go, oh, it's standing in the corner. And I said, what did you bring a truck? Because it's 6.5 feet tall and about 4 feet wide. And he goes, no, I just brought my Porsche. And I'm like, well, that's not going to work, and it's not going to survive strapped to the top. And I doubt you want to do that, like the Beverly Hillbillies or whatever. But he's like, no. Shit, I really like this. And I go, I'll make you a small one. I'll make you, a little 1 foot one. You can just put it on your mantelpiece or whatever. So I do that. He comes back the following week, and he takes it, and I give him a little layout of the design. And anyway, this is my introduction to the band. He takes off, and I go, oh, okay, I've done something for Metallica in a way. A couple months later, they play the Grammys, and Jason is wearing a shirt on stage on national TV with the design on his shirt.
Oh man.
And I'm like, what? I'm blown away. And sure enough, like a couple days later, I'm jumping all over the place. I can't believe it. That he's actually got a printed design. My shirt is a Metallica shirt. It doesn't say Metallica on it. I don't know where the origin or whatever's going on with this shirt, but he's wearing the design, so they do like it. And a couple days later, after I guess they come back from LA after shooting the Grammys, and Lars shows up at my work with a handful of shirts of the Captains of Crunch shirt that I had done, and and Justice for All tour jacket. And I'm like, okay, badge of honor, that's it. The shirt's nice, but this is a leather jacket that's embroidered, and I'm just blown away. And from that point forward, it was just like I'd get a call. I get a call over the intercom at my work. Lars is on the phone for you. He wants you to come to the Day on the Green, and they're playing this Day on the Green, and brings more designs. And and at the time, I'm kind of, I'm figuring how to draw. I'm figuring out my medium or whatever you want to call it. And all I could find were these like 2 foot by 3 foot illustration boards. And they're like stiff illustration boards. So I'm drawing these designs because I'm getting really good tension on with the pen and all that. And I'm having fun with it. So bringing designs to a show is I'm carting around these big, boards under my arm. And Day on the Greens are like huge outdoor festivals. So, and I want to see the band, and I'm in the pit, navigating these large portfolio boards underneath my arm, getting beer spilled on my designs. But I'm enjoying the band. So I go backstage at the end of all that, and Lars is sorting through things that, why is this one bent? And I'm like, well, it just happens. I can clean it up. I'll redraw it if you like the design. So we go through these processes, and I'd go to Kinko's at work after work. I'd go down to these Kinko's, these copy places, so I could do my layouts, and I would fax it into the management. And after a while, management were like, what, don't you have a computer? And I'm like, no, I don't. I just draw this stuff, and I'm at Kinko's. And they go, we know, we get these fax machines, these facsimiles with the Kinko's logo. And it's like, I can't believe you're doing shirt designs from Metallica, and you're, they're coming in very low budget here.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I'm sorry, and then they sent me a fax machine, like a brand new Panasonic. It was right. I was getting these gifts, and it was really nice, and they were very welcoming. Anyway, so long story short, they're just about to come into the Black Album, and they, yet again, they were gonna launch. They were gonna do a big record listening party at Madison Square Garden. But a couple days prior, they played this small secret show in Antioch at this place called the Phoenix Theater. And Kirk at the time had seen some foam core stuff that I had done, and he traded me for this pus head design that I had done out of foam core for Tower. Traded me 2 tickets to see the show in exchange for that. So I brought that along with some designs, and Lars and I picked up right where we had kind of paused for a minute, just do the end of the between the albums. And he was asking me for more designs. So I started doing, road crew t-shirts and things of that nature. And he invited me to shows, and again with the more designs, and we just started building up this relationship of, like, he would call, and I'd fly out to Kansas City because they were just about to go somewhere here or somewhere there, and I'd go to these shows and bring along these designs. So I started getting to know more of the road crew, which is again kind of that Metallica, Motorhead, these parallels of really, almost becoming, starting a relationship with the crew, because the crew are the guys that are really not getting the spotlight where they really deserve it. Yeah. And they work harder than anybody. Just like, Iron Maiden, Iron Maiden had these guys on the road crew that they'd get listed, and Metallica took a page out of that book. They would put in, the road crew, and but also you had people like Andy Batty.
But do you get the feeling that, like, for the road crew as well, are kind of like gatekeepers of the band? It only takes one trusted crew member to turn to the band and go, oh, that guy? Yeah, he's a dickhead. He did this, he did that. And that's you done. You're burned. That's
absolutely. It. And I grew up in a scene where it's like everything's a privilege. It's very much a privilege to be able to go backstage or to be able to work for some of these bands. So, I held that as a holy, kind of just same with like Motorhead and all that, is that, there's a mutual respect. And I really became somewhat in that circle as the guy that did the crew shirt designs. I mean, these were for the crew.
Yeah.
It wasn't for retail. No one was going to make money off it. I charged accordingly, and I was just happy to be invited to shows. So I got to know Big Mick really well, and Big Mick would give me these, and
right.
I absolutely adored this man. He was most personable. Tony Smith, who was their road manager at the time for a while, or stage manager, kind of personal manager. You just get to know these people, and it was like, you go to the show, the first thing you want to do is say hi to, you know, Andy Batty or Big Mick.
Well, the first time I heard "And Justice for All" was in a club in Birmingham that we were playing, and it was a test, and it was a test pressing being played through the PA before the doors opened.
Wow!
So I heard Black, and I was like, "What the fuck is it?" Well, we'd already heard. Harvester. We'd already heard Harvester of Sorrow, because that was the single that preceded the album.
Right.
But all of a sudden we hear this, and as soon as the voice, it's like, this is fucking Metallica. What's going on? So we look at the desk, and there's this massive guy stood with the sound guy. So we go over and go, hi, and it's like Brummy accent, and I'm because I'm the singer. I've always been, you know, I just walk up. You're Big Mick, aren't you? And he goes, yeah, I am. And I was like, bloody hell! And is that? And Justice for All, he's like, yeah, it is. I've come down to blast it through the PA, so I know what I've got to recreate, you know.
Oh, that's great. The building blocks.
Yeah, I was like, okay, that's really cool. So why don't you have a word with our tour manager? And our tour manager said, look, you know, would you do sound for the band? And he said, yeah, no problem. And he was like, you know, how much do you want? He was like, look, just keep me in beers for the night. And we did a cover of Whiplash, which we dedicated to him. And he came in the dressing room afterwards, and he said, I'm going to tell you what I told Metallica: slow down. But I'll also tell you, you play Whiplash better than they do. Cheers, lads. And that was it. Off he went. Yeah, I know. I was like, wow,
that's awesome.
So sorry, there's people who are listening to the podcast, and that is about the 10th time they've heard that story.
Oh wow!
Yeah, but I couldn't resist sharing it with you.
Oh no, that's awesome. Yeah, I mean, Mick and I you know, I've walked down. I'd walk down the aisle or whatever, and I'd walk past the sound booth, and he noticed, you know, I'd have my Captain's a Crunch shirt proudly wearing, you know, and you know, I'm going to do a terrible accent, so I won't even. But okay. he would yell, "Oi, where'd you get that?" And I'd go, and I'd look up, and I was like, "Oh, I'm in trouble. I shouldn't have worn a crew shirt. You know, I'm not in the crew. I'm not. You know, I'm trying to explain." And he's like, "No, get up here." And he's all, he leans over and puts a laminate around me. They made a laminate, the tour laminate of the Captain's of Crunch. And he's all, "Hey, sit right here. There's beers in the thing." And I'm like, "You're kidding me." And he's, I mean, sight unseen, never met me in my life, you know, and this is my introduction to Big Mick. I'm sitting with a bird's eye view in a comfy chair with beers at the ready. Brilliant. And I'm sitting at the best seat in the house, and I'm like a prize, you know, a proud papa or whatever. And we started a friendship, whereas there was this, and I might have tortured him a little bit at sometimes, because also you go backstage and you're trying to get your bearings, because I had designs that I had to show Lars, and I would drink a lot, and I'd get in a little bit of a panic. So I tried to, well, if I find Mick can let me know, you know, just stay here and they'll be here, or they'll be in this area later, but calm yourself down. He was always the calming force, which was, I appreciated, because I'd get enthusiastic, not disrespectful, but I mean, pretty enthusiastic. He would tell me, you really have to relax. I think switch from a different mode of entertainment. So anyway, but I would bring design. Says the internet. Okay, cool.
Yeah, don't worry.
Sorry, I'm rambling.
I've still got you. No, I've still got you.
Okay, perfect. Anyway, we became good friends, and he would, you know, send me things from time to time, and I would send him things from time to time. Go up to shows, and I'd bring gifts, you know, like stuff that he would think was funny, and put it on his console, and he did that, and it just became closer with these road guys as well as the band, and it started really kind of just, ingratiating myself, but also at the ready anytime that the enemies, and it would come. It would, and I tried to be as on point as possible. They tell me to jump, we need this one off really quickly. No problem. Stay up late, send something through Kinko's at the time, but then it would be later on in my the fax machine.
Yeah, later on your Metallica fax machine.
On my Metallica fax machine, which I would scrawl, thank you in the top right hand corner of every page sent. But and Kirk showed up at the end of the. I'll just fast forward because that pretty much sums up. I did a couple more crew shirts, and then at the end of the Black Album tour, they're playing this huge venue, Tournaut Werchter, July 3rd and 4th of 1993, which was signaling the end of the Black Album 3-year-long tour.
Yeah.
Where they would have me change the designs from 2 years to 3 years, and I would have to, they'd reprint and things like that. It was a lot of fun, but that kind of was the ending of this huge long run, which was just fantastic. And Kirk came into the record store that I worked at, and a good friend of mine who used to be the original singer for Spastic Children is a good friend of Kirk's, and he had come in just before they were about to go over to Europe to play these shows. And he goes, we're playing this big festival. You and his name's Jumbo, as our mutual friend. You and Jumbo should fly over and come see us, and we'll set you up and everything like that. Just find your way over there and we'll take care of the rest. And they were playing these huge festivals with like Lenny Kravitz, Neil Young, and Black Crowes, and Faith No More, and all this stuff. And he wrote out this list. It was, all of these bands. And then at the bottom, he wrote us. And he was like, yeah. And he gave us the dates, and he said, just figure your way over there and we'll get you set up. So Jumbo and I, pooled all our record collections together and sold them and got plane tickets and flew over there. And it was just amazing. So anyway, I know we're running short on time. Sorry.
No, not at all. This is. I tell you what. Why don't we leave it there? Because because this sounds like it's going to be really interesting, and I don't want you to feel like you're up against the clock. Because
no
and I'm king of the tangents, so I can interrupt and take you off piste and then bring you back.
That's fine too, though. That's a good chat. That's a good conversation.
Cool. All right. Well, I'm gonna stop recording. Yeah, that's a nice place to leave it for part one, man.
Is that cool?
Oh, absolutely. That's very
okay.
Cool. That's very cool.
All right.